of any conservative student group, no matter what it says, even if it's something nice about me. Don't believe a word you read in the New York Times. That's the best advice I can give you. Now, I want to address with you today a question, and that is there a cure for campus illiberalism? Colleges and universities have three fundamental purposes: the pursuit of knowledge, the preservation of knowledge, and the transmission of knowledge. Of course, there are other desirable, important ends that colleges and universities legitimately seek while also pursuing those fundamental purposes, but these three are fundamental. They are constitutive, defining purposes of academic institutions. All the other things those institutions do are founded upon them, and anything that they do that undermines those three fundamental purposes, they should not be doing. So, for example, though I support enthusiastically college athletics, I support them only insofar as they do not damage the academic program, that is, the transmission of knowledge. When, or to the extent that they do harm the academic program, they need to be reformed, or if they can't be reformed, if that's not feasible, abolished. Now, there are certainly colleges and universities today, as in the past, which place too much emphasis on sports to the detriment of the academic program. But athletics are not the great threat, certainly not the greatest threat to the integrity of our colleges and universities today. A far greater and graver threat is posed by the politicization of these institutions. The problem is most vividly manifest in the phenomenon of campus illiberalism, and by that I mean the unwillingness of so many members of college and university communities, faculty and students alike, to entertain or even to listen to arguments that challenge the opinions they happen to hold, whether those opinions have to do with climate science, affirmative action, racial or ethnic preferences, abortion and the sanctity of human life, welfare policy, marriage and sexual morality, U.S. foreign and defense policy, the economic order, or the origins of human consciousness. Speaking invitations to dissenters from those campus orthodoxies from the outside are usually simply not issued. Or if they are issued, dissenting speakers are disinvited under pressure from opponents of their views. You'll remember just a few months ago at commencement time, in case after case, commencement speakers who deviated from the campus orthodoxy, even if they weren't that conservative, were disinvited. Or if they were not disinvited, they were pressured to withdraw under the threat of disruptive forms of protest. Or if they did not withdraw, they were interrupted by abusive protesters and even shouted down. And it's not just visitors to college campuses. Faculty and student dissenters within campus communities are subjected sometimes to abuse and intimidation. Every effort is made to ensure that they are denied opportunities to speak their minds, or they are intimidated into silence. Now, I don't want to paint with too broad a brush here. The situation is better or worse at different institutions. As it happens, the situation is not at all bad at my own institution. I'm entering my 30th happy year at Princeton University, where I've never been subjected to intimidation or abuse, though threats from off campus have been made against me, one of which landed the perpetrator in a federal prison, and threats have been made against Princeton for having me on its faculty. But you all know the cases that I have in mind at colleges and universities around the country. Now, the core of the problem is this: many institutions are letting the side down, letting down the academic mission, compromising it, undermining it when it comes to the transmission of knowledge. And they're doing that by failing to ensure that their students at every level are confronted with and have the opportunity to consider the very best that's to be said on competing sides of all questions that are in dispute among reasonable people of goodwill. I don't care whether it's climate science or affirmative action or abortion or marriage or the origins of human consciousness or whatever it is. These institutions are permitting prevailing opinions to harden on campuses into dogmas, into orthodoxies, dogmas that go largely unchallenged, leaving students with the false belief at institutions around the country that there are, in fact, no disputes on these matters, at least among reasonable people of goodwill. At the core of our problem, then, is the toxic thing that provides an environment in which illiberalism flourishes and can be expected to manifest itself in the ways it manifests itself today. And that toxic thing is the phenomenon we know of as groupthink. Now, we fail to understand the depth of the problem or appreciate the danger it poses to intellectual life if we take a static view of knowledge, thinking of it as simply information that's passed into the mind of the recipient who records it passively and then draws on it as needed. This is worse than an oversimplification. The transmission of knowledge very often goes beyond the acquisition of information or skills and requires the engagement of the knowledge seeker with competing perspectives and points of view. That's as true, by the way, in the sciences as it is in the humanities and social sciences. It also requires certain virtues, including open-mindedness, respect for what John Stuart Mill called the liberty of thought and discussion, intellectual humility, in other words, humility of the sort one can possess only insofar as one appreciates, and not merely notionally, one's own fallibility. Love of truth above all is the virtue that's needed in our situation and always when it comes to knowledge seeking. So it's the task of colleges and universities, precisely as institutions of higher learning, to expose students to competing points of view and to foster in them those virtues: open-mindedness, intellectual humility, the love of truth. Now, that's necessary not because there are no truths to be obtained, but rather because the pursuit of truth and the deeper appropriation of truth by the inquiring subject, you or me or any other student or scholar, and their meaning and significance requires those attitudes and virtues. You see then that whatever is to be said about the claims that the predominance of certain views and their proponents on campuses and the exclusion of others is a problem of unfairness to conservatives like us, the problem I'm calling attention to here with you today is less about that unfairness than it is about the need to avoid, and where it is set in, to overcome groupthink in order to fulfill a constitutive purpose of academic institutions. Even if no one was worried about the fairness question, something more fundamental, even more fundamental, would be at risk and at stake. And that is the failure of these institutions to prosecute their constituting, justifying mission of truth-seeking, knowledge-seeking, the transmission of knowledge, the preservation of knowledge. We owe our students that, and we owe our students that whether they like it or not. They might be very comfortable in a groupthink situation, surrounded by people who share the same dogmas. The purpose of the university or the college is not to make students comfortable. In fact, it's to make them rather uncomfortable by making them confront ideas and arguments that will make them think, will make them rise or be aroused from their dogmatic slumbers. It's a scandal when students are graduated from liberal arts colleges and university programs with no understanding, or worse yet, with grotesque misunderstandings of the arguments advanced by serious scholars and thinkers who dissent from campus dogmas on issues such as those I've mentioned. Even if the opinions of the students happen to have acquired, the opinions that the students happen to have acquired in the environment of political correctness happen to be true, even then, the ignorance of the arguments of dissenters will prevent them from understanding the truth as deeply as they should and actually appropriating it. That is to say, understanding why it is so and why competing views have nevertheless attracted the attention and even the allegiance of serious thinkers. I believe it was the great early 20th century jurist Learned Hand, Judge Hand, who said that, and I quote him, "The spirit of liberty is the spirit of being not too sure one is right." In making that point, Hand was not endorsing radical skepticism or moral relativism or anything of the sort. Rather, he was pointing to the need for the virtue of intellectual humility in light of the inescapable reality of human fallibility. The judge's focus was on the need for that recognition and the corresponding virtue in the project of establishing and maintaining Republican government, free institutions, and respect for freedom of the human person. But what the judge said about the spirit of liberty is also true of the spirit of truth-seeking, that thing that colleges and universities exist for the sake of. A sense of one's own fallibility, a sense that one could be wrong, an openness to argument, an openness to being challenged, even in one's most basic premises and fundamental beliefs, a willingness to entertain criticism and engage critics. All of these things are essential, not just nice, not just it would be good that, but essential to the truth-seeking project. And that means they must be cultivated in institutions whose mission includes the pursuit and transmission of knowledge. Now, none of this is to say, none of it's to say, that we should be simply buried away in the library, or that we should not be advocates of our point of view, or that we should not be engaged politically. I would be a gross hypocrite at best if I were to suggest any such thing, because I myself am highly engaged politically, always from my academic colleagues' point of view on the wrong side. But politically engaged scholars, like all scholars, need to be highly cognizant of their own fallibility, even on matters about which they care deeply, and even when it comes to causes in which they are profoundly emotionally invested. Even as advocates, we must cultivate intellectual humility and a willingness to entertain the other guy's arguments in a serious way. One must never imagine that one cannot possibly be wrong about this or that cherished conviction, or that one's political adversaries and intellectual critics cannot possibly conceivably be right about anything. To adopt that attitude is simply fatal to the enterprise of truth-seeking. Openness to argument, openness to having one's premises and most fundamental beliefs and values challenged is vitally important to the knowledge-seeking mission that defines liberal arts institutions. A spirit of openness to argument and to challenge, where it flourishes in an academic culture, is precisely what immunizes institutions against groupthink and chases the groupthink away when it comes knocking at the door. Now, part of the problem, of course, is that once groupthink has taken hold, folks who are caught up in it don't recognize the problem. When is the last time you heard somebody say, yeah, you know what? My problem is that I'm caught up in groupthink. I tend to think just like everybody else around me thinks. You don't hear people say that, do you? I actually heard someone say it once. Someone said it to me. She didn't put it quite that starkly, but that was her thought. And I thought, gosh, that was an amazing expression of self-awareness and self-criticism. She was halfway out the door of groupthink because she realized that she was in it. But generally, the trouble is that when you're in groupthink, you don't know you're in it. You may realize that not everyone shares your views, but you will suppose that those who dissent from them are irrational or ill-motivated. You'll imagine that anyone who disagrees with you is a rube or a bigot or a tool of nefarious interests, a fool or a fraud. And I see this throughout the academic world today, where groupthink has set in big time. When someone is in groupthink, that person could pass a lie detector test claiming that he's not in groupthink. But that doesn't mean he's actually not in groupthink. And wherever ideological orthodoxies settle into place and are not subjected to serious questions and challenges, you have to worry about groupthink setting in. And that's true whether or not campus illiberalism manifests itself in the more visible ways we're now seeing so frequently, with dissenting speakers being excluded from campus or being shouted down or whatever. Now, it seems to me that viewpoint diversity, or what we might call in an academic setting intellectual diversity, has its value as a kind of vaccine against groupthink. It's a kind of antidote to groupthink when it sets in. Diversity of views, approaches, arguments, and the like is the cure for campus illiberalism. People who have the spirit of being not too sure they are right, people who want to be challenged because they know that challenging and being challenged are integral and indispensable to the process of knowledge seeking, such people, whatever their personal views, will want intellectual diversity on campus in order for the institution to accomplish its mission. When I entered the academic life in 1985, I was very fortunate because I entered at a time when there were still large numbers of what I call old-fashioned honorable liberals. They completely disagreed with me about just about everything. But they thought it was important to have dissenting voices around, voices dissenting from their own opinions. And I promise you that without such people, I couldn't have been hired or given tenure or installed in my endowed chair or anything else, because there weren't enough conservatives around, or very few indeed, to make those things possible. My academic career has been supported by honorable liberals who want dissenting voices around, or at least want a dissenting voice around. Now, of course, we all know that it's pretty hard to get this intellectual diversity, and I think there are a number of reasons for that. While in my own experience it's true, and some of my more liberal colleagues tell me in their experience it's true, that there's sometimes blatant, conscious, obviously deliberate discrimination against people who dissent from campus orthodoxies in hiring and promotion, conservatives mainly. I happen to think that blatant, conscious, deliberate discrimination, though it does occur, is not the heart of our problem. So let me tell you what I think the heart of our problem is. In this vale of tears, we human beings, fallen and frail creatures that we are, have a lot of trouble appreciating meritorious work and even good arguments when they run contrary to our own opinions, especially when we are strongly emotionally attached to those opinions. As I see it, this isn't a liberal or a progressive or a left-wing problem, not at least in principle. The moment it tends to be that way because people on the left dominate the institutions we're talking about. But in principle, it's not an ideological problem, it's a human nature problem. It's an original sin problem. Anytime an intellectual or political orthodoxy has hardened into place, it doesn't matter whether it's left-wing or right-wing. It's going to be very difficult for a lot of people to draw a distinction between work I disagree with, despite its being really quite good and challenging and interesting and important, and work that goes contrary to what I just know to be true on issues that are important and critical to me and bound up with my sense of who I am as a fill-in-the-blank. Progressive, feminist, atheist, whatever. People will experience challenges to the dominant opinions as outrageous attacks on truth, indecent assaults on essential values, threats to what is good and true and right and just, intolerable violations of the norms of our community. I don't know if any of you just today and yesterday and today have seen the tweeting going back and forth between Josh Barrow and Ryan Anderson. Has anybody happened to see it? Yeah, there are a couple of people who have. You got this New York Times writer, Josh Barrow, who is saying to Ryan Anderson, who is a marvelously gifted, brilliant, articulate defender of marriage as the conjugal union of husband and wife. Well, the New York Times guy, Barrow, says, I don't need to be civil to you. In fact, I shouldn't be civil to you. You deserve incivility. Why? Because you're wrong. You know, that's toxic. Toxic. Barrow will never in his life learn anything, whether he's right or wrong, will never in his life learn anything as long as he insists on adopting that attitude. To his credit, of course, Anderson is exemplifying precisely the opposite attitude, a willingness to engage in argument, to be challenged, to try to learn something from his interlocutor. Now, my very dear friend, Alan Kors, at the University of Pennsylvania, Professor Alan Kors, wonderful historian, with whom I am usually in 100% agreement on issues of academic culture and reform, is someone who disagrees with my claim that the problem is a human nature problem, not a problem with a particular ideology that happens to be dominant in contemporary academic culture. Professor Kors thinks the problem is, in some essential way, at the level of principle, not just as it happens today contingently, a left liberal problem, a problem with progressive ideology itself, not a problem rooted in what other circumstances we might call original sin. He thinks that the dominant political, cultural perspective on campuses today is inherently illiberal. Now, I'm skeptical about that. I think what we have here really is a human nature problem, a problem that can be counted on to arise and threaten the integrity of intellectual life anytime there is an absence of dissenting opinions against an ideological orthodoxy, especially when it afflicts most academic institutions, and most especially when it prevails at the wealthiest, most prestigious, and therefore most influential ones. So what should we do? Now, of course, as a dissenter myself and a member of a tiny minority, Ivy League conservatives, I'm not in a position of having much power to do anything about it. But I would say to my friends who are on the more liberal side of the street and who perceive the problem as I do, to those old-fashioned honorable liberals, I would say, well, number one, of course, we need to strike against any conscious discrimination based on viewpoint. It does happen, and it's silly and dishonest to deny that it happens. And number two, by both precept and example, we need to strike at the other, and what I've argued more fundamental problem is, subconscious discrimination. We need to strongly encourage faculty, administrators, board members, people with influence in our colleges and universities, as well as students themselves, to be rigorously self-critical, to understand the importance of challenging and being challenged. We need to encourage people to be self-critical in ways that would enable them honestly to say, as I might say about the work of, for example, the philosopher Jeffrey McMahon, well, you know, I'm really scandalized by his defense of the moral permissibility of late-term abortion and even infanticide. But there's an argument he makes that's got to be met. And the burden is on me to make the argument that our dignity as human beings comes in virtue of our humanity, or by our status as rational creatures, beings possessing, at least in root form, even at the earliest stages of development, the capacities for the types of characteristically human activities that give human beings a special kind of dignity and inviolability. The burden is on me, in other words, to meet his challenge. And I want my colleagues on the other side to take the same position about work by conservative scholars, especially in these hot-button areas. But I acknowledge it's a hard thing to do, and it's especially hard when orthodoxies have hardened into place and one isn't even hearing arguments against one's position. And when one is not hearing them, and everyone one knows and everyone in one's circle tends to be thinking the same thing about an issue or set of issues, no matter how much diversity there is out there on other stuff, we're headed like a shot into groupthink. When one is hearing the same thing from everyone whom one respects, when one is being reinforced in one's opinions by all one's friends and colleagues, whether it's a student or a faculty member, the motivation to think more critically tends to be very hard to work up. It really is. Working it up is so much easier when one is regularly, in the normal course of things, being challenged by thoughtful people who do not always see things just as one does oneself. Now, I have the advantage of being in that condition every moment of every day at Princeton University. So I think it's best, and I tell my liberal colleagues it's best for them and for the institutions they serve, not to get ourselves into this fix in the first place by permitting ideological orthodoxies to form on college and university campuses. But if they have formed, then our challenge is to help people to appreciate work and be willing to say that they appreciate work that is meritorious even when they do not agree with the arguments and positions being advanced. Now, I want to give a couple of examples of the value of viewpoint or intellectual diversity from my own personal experience in the academy. One is the James Madison program at Princeton, which I've had the honor to direct for 14 years since its founding. The impact of the Madison program on the culture of Princeton University, precisely by bringing viewpoint diversity into our community in a serious way, has been tremendous and salutary. It gives me enormous satisfaction that this opinion of mine about the importance of the Madison program is shared by many of my liberal colleagues who share none of my other opinions. They praise the Madison program for turning what might have been campus monologues into dialogues, benefiting everybody in the process. The presence on campuses of an initiative like the Madison program ensures that there are people around who think different things, even about fundamental issues that everybody cares about, in which many people assume all academics, being left-wingers, are on one side of. And that's great because it means that in general discussions across the university, and not just in the Madison program's own events, people cannot simply suppose or assume that everybody in the room shares the same assumptions or holds the same positions. people know that they will have to defend their premises because those premises will be challenged. That makes for a different, I assure you, a very different and much better and more serious kind of engagement, a kind of engagement that profoundly enriches the intellectual life of the entire community. The second example, again from my own experience, is the experience I've had teaching with my beloved friend and colleague, Professor Cornel West. Now, Professor West and I, well, let's just say we don't agree about everything. But we teach together, and even though he recently left Princeton for Union Theological Seminary, he's coming back again this coming spring so that we can teach together again. It's a beautiful thing, our teaching together, because we're able to collaborate across the lines of ideological and political difference in the common project of truth-seeking, knowledge-seeking, wisdom-seeking, engaging with each other and our students in serious, respectful, civil dialogue, striving to understand each other and learn from each other, treating each other not as enemies, but as partners, even as we challenge each other, as partners in the dialectical enterprise of seeking truth, knowledge, wisdom. In a given semester, one of our seminars might begin with Sophocles' Antigone and conclude with Martin Luther King's letter from the Birmingham jail. In the weeks in between, we might be reading St. Augustine's Confessions, Machiavelli's Prince, Marx and Engels' Communist Manifesto, and Hayek's Road to Serfdom. John Henry Newman's Idea of a University, John Dewey's A Common Faith, W.E.B. Du Bois' Souls of Black Folk, C.S. Lewis's Abolition of Man, Antonio Gramsci's Prison Notebooks, Leo Strauss's Natural Right and History. No one-sided deal. Lots of different perspectives, from Marx to Hayek represented, with a couple of professors in front whose sympathies run in polar opposite directions, but engaging each other in a serious way, inviting the students into that conversation. And I'll tell you, we can't wait for Wednesdays to come each week so that we can be back in the classroom together. We have a blast, which is nice, and we learn from each other. Our approach is the very opposite of antiquarian. We look for the timeless meaning and contemporary significance of the texts we assign. We consider existential, moral, religious, and political questions that are important to us and our students in the context of those writings I mentioned. And here's the thing that really matters. The students learn, and they learn how to learn. They're not there being indoctrinated. They're not in catechism class. They're not in a context of groupthink. They learn to approach intellectual and political matters dialectically, critically engaging the most compelling points to be adduced in favor of competing ideas and claims. They learn the value and importance of mutual respect and civility. They learn from two guys with some pretty strong opinions, neither of whom is shy about stating his opinions publicly, that the spirit of truth-seeking, like the spirit of liberty, is a spirit open to the possibility that one might be wrong about this or that or the other thing, including maybe something that's pretty important. And so, someone might ask, my colleagues sometimes do ask when I make these arguments to them, am I advocating affirmative action for conservatives? Well, no. I'm advocating attitudes and practices that will cure campus illiberalism without the need to, quote, recruit conservatives, unquote, or give conservative scholars preferences in hiring and promotion. I want everybody to be held to the same standards. But that's the point. Hold everybody to the same standards. Don't judge people on the basis of whether they happen to be conservative or happen to be liberal. If conscious and unconscious prejudice against people who dissent from prevailing dogmas were defeated, if intellectual diversity were truly valued for the vital contribution it makes to the cause of learning, the hiring problems would take care of themselves, and no affirmative action for conservatives would be needed. A historian such as the great Alan Gelzo, who's at Gettysburg College, would be at Yale or Stanford, which is where a scholar of that degree of brilliance and eminence deserves to be. He would be hired by a vote of a group of people, few or none of whom happen to share his conservative politics or his evangelical Christian faith. A political theorist and historian of ideas like Paul Ray would be at Harvard or the University of Chicago. We would not have departments of sociology or political science or history with 43 liberals and 1 conservative, more likely 1 libertarian. Nor would we have the embarrassments, and more importantly, the tragedy of campus illiberalism. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to share these thoughts with you. I appreciate it very, very much. Is that people going for microphones? Yeah, okay, over here. I'll go back and forth. Yeah.
Craig Cannon, Concordia University School of Law in Boise, Idaho.
Concordia University,
Yes.
Missouri Church, Missouri Synod Lutheran Church?
Yes, associated with them, yes.
Yeah, very good.
My question is, I guess you've essentially described a heckler's veto on campus these days. What do we do as students to combat the heckler's veto and to increase the dialogue that you're suggesting among our professors as well as among us as students?
Yeah, very good, very good. Two points. One, as most of what I've learned from the left, and this is one I've learned from the left. In fact, from the big daddy of all the leftists, from Marx himself, Karl Marx. And that is, number one, highlight, accentuate, press on the contradictions. Highlight the contradictions. Bring to light the contradiction between the stated principles of the university and its administration and faculty. We're for open discourse. We're for the civil exchange of ideas. We're open-minded. And the actual practice, which is either participating in the heckler's veto or standing idly by and letting students or others exercise that veto with impunity. That's number one. And number two, this is critical, do not be intimidated. Never be intimidated. The heckler's veto only wins when they back you guys down. If you refuse to be backed down, no matter the circumstances, if you stand up to the bully, you will win. So those two are the most important things you've got to do.
Thank you very much.
And never give them a break. Point out those double standards. Just be relentless in pointing out those double standards. Press on and make it hurt. Yeah, over here.
Hi, my name is Daniel Mail. I actually go to Brandeis, so it was a heckler's veto.
Yes, I know the case.
So the thing that became abundantly clear to me was that so many students go into the classroom and they see a professor with a PhD and they give so much respect as they would assume that they should, and they don't really question.
I don't agree with that, but anyway, go ahead.
Well, no, I think that it's like they
A
naturally.
PhD isn't what earns your respect, but that's why. I mean,
No,
there are some good professors. Yep.
Yeah, so there seems to be this tendency where students don't really question the professor.
Yeah.
So how would you suggest to the, I guess the common man, when they go into a classroom and they clearly see, they're teaching straight Marxism or straight socialism, how do you suggest students really questioning that and not risking, grades being marked down?
Well, thank you for that question. I'm afraid you're going to have to take the risk. Your integrity is at stake. Yes, it's not fair. I get that. Yes, it can hurt your career. I get that. But there's something more important than your career, and that's your integrity. Now, that doesn't mean you have to dive headlong into, but it means sometimes you've got to take on the professor in the classroom, and take on the professor when you're writing the paper, knowing, just challenging in effect, defying the professor to grade you down, mark you down because of the expression of your views. Again, it's a question really of standing up. But here, it's more important. There's another important dimension, which is setting an example for your fellow students. It's really critical that those of you who do dissent set an example. Now, here's the way to survive while setting an example. You got to be better than the professor. I know that's hard. But that means you have to equip I tell my students, there's a difference between boldness and lunacy. It's lunacy to challenge a guy with power over you when you don't understand the issues, you're not equipped, you can't stand up to him, he's going to make you look like an idiot in front of the whole class. So that means you got to do some extra work, which means boning up, learning the stuff, going onto the internet. Thank God we have the internet, it's wonderful, and figuring out what other people have said about the positions, by way of criticism of the positions that the professor holds. You'll stun the professor, you'll surprise him. You'll be relying on stuff that he is counting on you're not knowing about because he doesn't have it on the reading list, to challenge him and put his own perspective in some serious jeopardy. And those resources are out there. There's a great project that a guy named Andy Zwick is doing in connection with the program in constitutional studies that Harvey Mansfield runs at Harvard, which is he's putting up online access to works of many, many great thinkers, both historical and contemporary. Harvey Mansfield himself is one, Leo Strauss, there are many, many others, in Hayek, people in economics, politics, philosophy, and so forth. And students can just go to these websites and they can mine the websites for material to use in challenging the professor. And it's exhilarating for your fellow students, as well as enlightening, mind-opening, to see that the professor really can be challenged, even by a kid in the class who doesn't have a PhD or even a BA yet. So it's a great thing that students can now always be respectful. No, don't be a smart aleck, but be persistent. You know, be persistent. Be a bit of a gadfly in the class. Raise the issue and push the issue, but equip yourself to do it. And the resources are out there to do it. And by the way, don't excuse yourself from the responsibility to challenge the professor as well as your fellow students by saying, I'm just not equipped to do it yet. I'll get around to learning. You got to do it. You got to get yourself equipped and do it. Over here.
Hello, thank you so much for coming today. I'm Jill Lanoy. I'm also from Brandeis University. I have a question. Can you give any advice on how to ensure the fighting of the double standards for those who oppose Ayaan Hirsi Ali, for example, but yet criticize the censoring of the Satanic Mass at Harvard? Can you help give advice on helping us argue the double standard, show the double standard exists?
Yeah. The Satanic Mass at Harvard created, part of it was there was so much misinformation floating around about what was actually going on, who was behind it, what they were going to do, and so forth. It made it very difficult to deal with the case.
Host and then they didn't.
Yeah, there was all kinds of crazy stuff going on. But here's the thing. As I understand it, I've met her on 3 or 4 occasions. I've read some of her works. Hirsi Ali was prepared to go and make a rational argument. That's what universities are about. They're in the business of the exchange of ideas and arguments. The currency of academic discourse, of intellectual discourse, are reasons and arguments. If someone's willing to do that, then they should be welcome on the campus. She wasn't there to manipulate. She wasn't there to rabble-rouse. She wasn't there to, I won't go into, burn things down, anything like that. She was there to do business in the currency that Brandeis University claims is the currency that works on the campus. Now, the Black Mass was another thing. My understanding is that and I wasn't necessarily opposed to letting the Black Mass go forward on the Harvard. I'm a Catholic myself, and the Black Mass is purely an anti-Catholic thing, but, I didn't think Harvard should actually shut it down. I think that Harvard should have opposed it, but I would draw the line precisely because I don't want to set a precedent that can then be used to stifle regular, respectable speech. But in any event, the Black Mass was just like, getting up and taking your clothes off or lighting a fire on the campus or something like that. I mean, it was just grunts. There was no argument. It was not something that was done in the discourse in the currency of academic discourse.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, over here.
Good afternoon. Jonathan Armesto. I'm a pre-law student at Ave Maria University.
I
I've
know
been
that
waiting
place.
4 days to speak with you. You're the highlight of this conference for me, so thank you for coming. As a fellow of the U.S. Supreme Court and with your distinguished background, I want to ask you, speaking to civil liberties and speaking to public decency or morality, and in defense of the natural law, in defense of the rule of law, can we agree that mandatory arbitration clauses are nothing short but the abolishment of our civil liberties, and that mandatory arbitration clauses are nothing but the abolishment of the U.S. Constitution, really, that every American has the right to petition their government when harmed, and that, where the courts are inaccessible, really, I mean, laws are irrelevant.
What context are you talking about the mandate? You mean in ordinary settlement agreements in civil cases?
In consumer, I guess you could say in contracts, really, where if I enter into a contract with
No,
a
I don't see
credit
any.
card
I mean, I
company
think there'd be a problem with it would be a civil liberties issue if you and I were forbidden from entering into an agreement to arbitrate. So I think we need to have that freedom. But I don't think the government should force us to submit to mandatory arbitration. Do you see the difference? If we freely agree to it, that's fine. I have no problem with that at all. I'll give you another example. Sometimes people agree that if they have a dispute under a contract, they won't go into the civil courts. They'll go into religious courts, into a Beth Din, or into a Catholic canon law court or something like that. I have no problem about that. I wouldn't want the state requiring Jews who get into conflict with each other to go to a Bet Din, or Catholics who get into a conflict with each other to go to a Catholic ecclesiastical court. Do you see the difference?
I would still say, I mean, do you think Americans have the right to give up their protections to the Constitution? If they say, like, I renounce the Constitution, yes, I'll deal, with your attorney and give up the right to my attorney. It's just be your attorney versus me.
Well, I don't think that's what mandatory arbitration does.
That is, historically, it's been the case with credit cards, with...
Well, I have a friend
cell
who's an
phones.
arbitrator. He's an arbitrator. It's the business he's in. He used to be practicing law. He's now an arbitrator. People agree all the time to go to him. Now, he's not one side's lawyer. He's not the other side's lawyer. He's this guy who does business in arbitration. I don't have any problem with him being in that business. I do have problems with people being forced into arbitration, forced to give up their right to go into the courts if they prefer to go into the courts and want to litigate the whole thing out. But I think there's a civil liberties, you got a civil liberties problem on both sides, and you got to navigate between the two. You don't want people losing their freedom by being forced into arbitration. You don't want people losing their freedom by being prevented from arbitrating if that's what they want to do.
I would cite the case of Jamie Lee Jones as well.
I don't know the case. You'll have to, but why
Thank
don't we
you so
talk
much.
about it? You can email me.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, over here.
Hi, I'm Maggie Hammerly. I'm a junior at Duke University.
Yeah.
So how do you have a constructive intellectual debate when you're being open-minded and listening and trying to find the truth, but the other side tells you that they already know what you believe and that the things you stand for are judgmental, offensive, and don't deserve to even be in the discussion?
Be tough. Be aggressive. Tell them I'm not taking that nonsense. If you got an argument, give me an argument. Don't tell me what you think I believe about 15 other things. Here's my view about this: marriage, climate science, affirmative action. Here's my view. Here's my argument for it. Now, you got a counter argument or not? I don't want to hear about you believe in creationism, or you're against Darwin or something like that. That's not what the issue is here. The issue here is, let's say, affirmative action or climate science. Here's my argument. Here's the evidence. Have you got a counter argument or not? Otherwise, you're just blowing smoke, I'm wasting my time. Be tough. Be tough. Don't put up with any nonsense from these people. They're not entitled to it.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you. Thanks very much.